I'd like to introduce now, I think everybody in the room after this many years knows Dr. Greg Dimmick. He helps us in so many different ways. His interests are so varied. He even has time to do a little practice as a doctor every once in a while. But right now he's going to talk about, and we have a slideshow here. And by the way, could we have the house lights dimmed? I tried to arrange for that about, there we go. Thank you. If you'll just dim them so that we can see the slide. And without further ado, let me introduce Greg Dimmick.
Thank you, David, and I appreciate everybody having me here today. It's an unusual circumstance. I will let you know that if I seem a little bit flustered today, just last night I was appearing in Red, White, and Tuna as Arliss Struve, and I also played I Need a Good One. And I get to go back and do that this evening, so if I break into a little Arliss Struve or Anita, y'all will understand it's just part of my role. We will, and we sure will. What I'd like to do today is not play the part of an MD or a historian PhD today. What I'd like to do is play the part of a lawyer. And what I'd like to do is make a case today, and y'all are the jury, and you can let me know afterwards if you have any questions or any comments if you think I'm off base here. What I'd like to do is talk about the cannon that was on display here at the conference 2 years ago. And I'm going to tell you the story, and I'm going to try to lead you through my argument as to why this cannon that was on display here is actually a Alamo Cannon, an Alamo Defender cannon. There we go. This is 1985, I believe, 85, 86. There was a cannon that was brought back from Pennsylvania, and it was put up for auction. J.P. Bryant is the one that chased down the cannon, and I don't know exactly, I've talked with him about it, but I don't know all the details about how he found out that this cannon existed. But this cannon was brought back from Pennsylvania, and it was put up for sale in the Texas State Historical Association auction, and it was purchased, and at the time it was recognized that it was probably an Alamo Cannon. This is a picture of the cannon as it appeared at that time, and you can see that they talked about it being an Alamo Cannon. They didn't have a whole lot of documentation, but they did have a bit of a story to get us started on this research. The gentleman that bought the cannon was John Alexander McCrae, and he bought the cannon. We think we know the purchase price, but I don't want to go into money here. He bought this cannon, and he got it put on a carriage, and he put it in his barn. And apparently the cannon stayed in the barn for years, and it was basically forgotten. This is the way the cannon looked there at the barn. It's a 1730 to a 1750 bronze 4-pounder cannon, and it's got some very interesting damage done to it. The cascabel, which is the ball at the end of the cannon that would have been used to raise and lower the cannon, has been removed. And you can see from the size of that cannon that was not easily done. Also, the trunnions were removed. The trunnions are what sticks out from the side of the cannon to hold it on the carriage. And the handles have been knocked off too. Interestingly enough, the cannon was not spiked. It does also have I think I have a picture of it has a royal crest on it, a Spanish royal crest. There we go, that's a picture of the royal crest. And also I want to give credit here. We had a transportation crew that got this cannon from North Texas. And, well, I should say, first of all, Rick Range, and he cannot be here today. I'd hoped he could be here, but he is the one that chased down the cannon. And he's the one that found out about it, and he's the one that talked to the family and got it donated to the Friends of the San Jacinto Battleground. But Rick and Gary Wiggins, and Gary is here. Gary, will you stand up for just a second? Everybody applaud this guy. He has hauled this cannon around more than the Mexican Army did or the Texans. his poor truck, probably the shocks are probably totally destroyed. The Cannon was originally taken to A&M and conservation was done on the Cannon, and that's when they verified that yes, it was the right age and all that kind of stuff. When the Cannon was here 2 years ago, it wasn't actually quite done being conserved, but it's pretty much done now. Now I want to tell you the story behind the Cannon, and that is supposedly this Cannon was a partial payment of a debt, and it was sent from San Antonio to Philadelphia in the 1850s or sometime in that period, maybe the 1860s. But it was sent to this guy, Howard Barclay French, okay? And French was a pharmacist, and his family actually started Smith, Kline and French. But his division of this company broke off, and they became manufacturers of paints and manufacturing goods and this kind of stuff, which I thought made a nice story that there was obviously a lot of building going on in San Antonio at the time, so it's possible that people in San Antonio would have bought painting supplies and gear from him. Now, he had a country home outside of Philadelphia called Alderbrook. And he also, his daughter was Anna French McKeague, and I'll tell you why I wanted to put that in a second. This is Alderbrook. This is his country estate. And you can see this is turn of the century on the left. And the other on the right is where Rick Range went to find Alderbrook, and it's still there. And there are some family papers, interestingly enough, there. This is a picture of Alderbrook at a different era, and I'm not sure exactly on the date on this. I'm sure we have it. But you can see down on the insert on the right, you can see our cannon, and it's a pretty distinctive cannon. As far as the muzzle goes, it's an unusual cannon, so I think it's pretty obvious that this is indeed the cannon that was on display at Alderbrook. Now, we found a relative, interestingly enough, and we found her because of a newspaper article that they said she was getting married. And we were able to locate her, and Rick Range actually interviewed her and has gotten her written statements on this stuff. Her grandmother was Anna French McKeague, who was the daughter of French. And as a child, she was told that this cannon at Alderbrook, there were two of them. One was, she said, was an Alamo cannon. The other one, she was told, was a Mexican-American war cannon. And she also told us, now there's an autobiography of one of the cousins of John Barclay French, and he was a Samuel French. Samuel French was a Confederate general, interestingly enough. Even though he was from New Jersey, he married a woman from Mississippi, and he became a plantation owner in Mississippi, and was a Confederate general. He was artillery officer, which I thought was another nice tie-in, that here he had an interest in cannons, and he was an author, and he did his autobiography. And so we were thinking, well, maybe this is the connection. We started looking into his autobiography and finding out about the history of Samuel French, and we found out he was a West Point grad, and he served. We had talked earlier today about Ringgold's flying artillery. Well, this gentleman served under Ringgold at Palo Alto. And he also lived in San Antonio for a while, and he served there, and he helped build the road from San Antonio to El Paso. And he was married, and his wife actually died in childbirth in San Antonio. But then this last thing, we were pretty suspicious. Well, maybe this is the guy. This is a great connection that there's a French in San Antonio at about this period. But then we read something more interesting, that his wife's sister was also married to a French, and it turns out it's his brother, John C. French. And John C. French was from San Antonio. He was born in New Jersey as well, but he ended up moving to San Antonio and lived there most of his life. John C. French is a really interesting character. He was born in New Jersey. He started a mercantile business in San Antonio. And I started thinking, well, that's a really good connection, because he could have easily been buying goods from the French company, who was family in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. He built the French building, which later on became the courthouse and city hall. And he started the first gas company, and he was one of the first bankers, started one of the first banks. But then I really was interested when I came across this fact that he was one of several prominent Texans who was awarded a grant to start this railroad, and this was in 1850. He was named as one of the board of directors, and I was really impressed when I saw the list of the board of directors, because another one of the members of the board of directors was Samuel Maverick. And so in 1850, I've got John C. French and Samuel Maverick are partners, okay? Before I tell you what happened to the cannons and why I think possibly this is an Alamo cannon, I'm fairly convinced it is, by the way, and those of you who know me, I'm kind of one of those doubters when people come to me and tell me, oh, I've got an Alamo cannon or an Alamo sword or something like that. It actually happens to me quite a bit since I put out my book on Mexican Army artifacts. But I want to tell you what didn't happen to the cannons. This is from a letter that Filosola wrote to Andrade in May 18th, 1836. He was in his retreat by this time, and he wrote this letter to Andrade. And I've only seen it translated in English one time, and that was in a master's thesis about the Mexican Army after San Jacinto, and she translated this letter. But I have heard rumors that everybody says, well, those cannons were thrown in the river in San Antonio. I know there have been several searches of the river in San Antonio looking for the cannons, and they haven't found them. And maybe they should have found this letter before they did it, because my translation, and I had John Wheat check it for me to make sure I didn't mess up, but my translation says that Filosola told him to disable the cannons. Now, the one translation I saw said spiked, but it's not spiked. It's disabled from firing, is what they're saying. Make it unable to fire. And then they go on and say to throw the ammunition in the river. So it's possible somebody looked at this document and just looked at the Spanish and saw that they were talking about the cannons, and they were talking about throwing something in the river. But he didn't tell him to throw the cannons in the river. So what did happen to the cannons? Here's Samuel Maverick, and I think most of you are probably aware that he was a prominent San Antonian, and I think he was mayor, and I think he served in Congress and a lot of different things. But Samuel Maverick bought a piece of property that included part of the Alamo courtyard. And in 1852, they were doing work in his property, and they found, I believe it's 13 cannons. I can't read it from here, but I believe that's right. And I think 4 of them, 3 or 4 were bronze cannons, which, by the way, this is a bronze cannon. So there were 13 cannons dug up in 1852. There's history of them being reburied and dug up 3 or 4 different times. And each time it seems as though some of them kind of disappeared. They have a record that one of them was given to a friend of Maverick's, not the French's, but we know then that he actually did that. We have letters of him writing to the governor of Texas during the Civil War saying, you're welcome to come dig up these cannons if you want them, but he said, but I'm not going to do it. He told him he was too busy. So I want to restate my case here that Maverick and John C. French are partners in 1850, and in 1852, he digs up 13 cannons on his place. And we think we have a good idea about what happened to the other 3 bronze cannons, so there was only one that we didn't know what happened to. My argument is that this may well be the one. Interestingly enough, one of them was melted down and used for the church bell. I think it's St. Mark's Cathedral, I could be wrong, in San Antonio. So, what are the facts here? We know that J.P. Bryant brought back this cannon. We know that the French family was under the impression that this was an Alamo cannon. We know that the Philadelphia / Alderbrook French family had family members that lived in San Antonio in the 1840s all the way to 1870s. We know that Samuel G. French was an artillery officer, and he lived in San Antonio on several occasions. We know that John C. French lived in San Antonio, and he was partners with Samuel Maverick in 1850. We know that Samuel Maverick had several Alamo cannons that were on his property. And I can't read the last part. Huh? 4 brass cannons. Okay, thanks. We also know that the brass cannons were brought back from Philadelphia. Oh, I'm struggling here. I'm gonna let y'all read the facts there, okay? I can see that one of them is that the damage done was consistent. Some people say, well, they should have been spiked. Some of the Alamo cannons were spiked, but a lot of them had this same damage that this cannon has. And if you think about it, that damage is far more damaging than spiking a cannon. If you spike a cannon, you can take the spike out, you can re-drill the hole, the fire hole, but you can't repair this kind of damage. And it took some real effort to do this kind of damage. It wasn't done by some kids playing with it or somebody that just wanted to beat up some cannons. It had to have been intentional. We also know that it's a fact that we don't have any proof of this cannon being shipped from San Antonio to Philadelphia. We have no proof that Maverick gave this cannon to the Frenches. Here's a picture of the cannon. We have got the Alamo to accept it as a loan. It still is property of the Friends of the San Jacinto Battleground. We would like to eventually get the cannon given to the Alamo. One of the things we wanted to do is make sure that it had a good home there before we did that, because the A&M did such a great job conserving the cannon. You can see how gorgeous it looks. We wanted to make sure that they had it properly housed, and we were really excited. They put it in the chapel in the first room on the left. Yeah, so if you go in the chapel, first room on the left, you can see a cannon that may well have been an Alamo cannon. Now I want to take it a little step further and tell y'all some real fresh history. There's all kinds of fresh history coming up. This is a document that I found, and another gentleman found, interestingly enough, online, because he and I are both going through the Mexican military archives. And he had this, he found it separately, and he is published in the Alamo Journal. And my version and my little short story, short article on this document is going to be published in the Southwest Historical Quarterly, this one that's coming out for April of this year, so you'll have a preview of that article. This is an article that was written by, or a letter that was written by the director of artillery in Mexico City, but what he's doing is he's saying what Ampudia told him. Well, Pedro Ampudia was the commander of the Mexican artillery at the Alamo, and interestingly enough, also in the Sea of Mud, where I found all my artifacts. So I was well acquainted with Ampudia at the time. But he is writing, obviously, the information he was giving was he was sending to Santa Ana, and he was obviously asked which of your soldiers were brave and who of your officers did well. And I've seen the appendices for this document have been found and published before. There's 2 appendices. One is the list of all the arms and munitions that were captured from the Texans at the Alamo. That's Ampudia's list of the captured ordnance from the Alamo. And there was another appendix that was what ordnances the Mexicans used in the siege of the Alamo. So it's what they used up and what was captured. But for some reason, they had never noticed this document that went along with it that had quite a description of the artillery in the siege and the taking of the Alamo. Just a few pointers about what my take on this document were. I actually have slides if anybody wants to look at them later, but I've hidden them because I didn't want to go through the whole document. I've got the whole document on slides. But Ampudia was a real bootlicker. He was everything that Santa Anna did, he said was a great choice. Everything. He said he acted like every time they placed a cannon, it was where Santa Anna told him to, and it was an excellent choice. He also verifies that the Mexicans did not just ignore the fact that the Texans shot the 18-pounder at them. They set up 2 howitzers, and they lobbed howitzer shells back in them. The San Luis Battalion report says the same thing. They said that they lobbed 4 back in there. In this document, Ampudia actually says they continued until nightfall bombarding the Texans. Also, he talks about when they were first setting up their very first cannon position, he says that the artillery, the Mexican artillery, was able to dismount 2 of the larger Texas pieces. And Almonte says the same thing, and he used the same word, dismounted. I think a lot of people would agree that they probably got them repaired and got them back in service, because it seems as though they used those larger pieces later. But that's verification of that fact. One of the most fascinating things to me was that Ampudia said the Texans, when they were building the North Battery, and they had a wooden palisade to protect them from the Texans as they're putting the battery in place, he said the Texans fired hot shot at them. He said they heated up balls to where they were red hot and shot them against them, probably trying to light the palisade on fire so that they wouldn't have any protection. But Ampudia said that using hot shot goes against all laws of humanity and war. So I love it that we have a Mexican officer telling how immoral the Texans are, because we always hear the other side, but we don't usually get that drift. Another really fascinating piece is that I have heard that the Mexican artillery officers actually used the Texans' artillery inside the fort, but I had not seen documentation of it. But Ampudia said that he and some of his officers, and I'm guessing some of the enlisted men too, but of course he doesn't mention them, they took one of the lighter Texas pieces down a ramp, and he said they used it against one of the buildings in which the Texans had fled, and he said they were causing a disastrous fire from there against the Mexican infantry, and he said with a few shots of that, they were able to end that desperate defense, is what he called it. So I thought that was fascinating, that yes, he was inside the Alamo, yes, he brought a Mexican cannon down. I just found another deal in Tom Lindley's papers that I was looking through, and Tom had found in Mexico City, in Ampudia's military records, a report from Juan Valentin Amador, and it says basically the same thing. Ampudia says Amador was there. Amador talks about how there were 13 Texans in the building, and that Ampudia was able to dislodge them with that fire. Now, obviously, I wanted to tell you all that interesting piece of information about that new document, but I had an ulterior motive in doing that. First of all, this is a howitzer, by the way. It's at West Point, and there's one of our howitzer shells that we found. This is what they would have fired against the Alamo, the howitzer shells. Those are exploding shells. The reason I wanted to put this document in here is because if you think about it, I've just made an argument that our cannon is a Defender cannon from the Alamo, and it's a smaller piece. They had 4-pound cannons. I've seen one source that says 2 brass, 2 iron. I've seen one that says 3 iron, 1 brass. And then they had three 3-pound cannons, but I've seen a source that says they were mounted more on naval carriages. And so there's a chance, if you think about it, that this cannon that we have recently lent to the Alamo and hope to donate was that cannon that Ampudia wheeled down the ramp. We don't know exactly where the cannons were, but I'm anxious to do some more research. My mind's always working. I saw that Juan Valentin Amador wrote that document about Ampudia being in there and using the Texans cannon. Well, Juan Amador was the second in command of Cosa's column. And Cosa's column, and I just had to go look all this up, attacked the west wall. And so there's some more information where we may know at least where one small piece of artillery was along that west wall, because that's most likely the one that Ampudia would have used. In fact, Amador says that Ampudia came to him immediately and asked permission to go inside the Alamo. So it's all neat stuff. This slide, we're talking about potential places that research can be done. And I don't think we're ready to officially announce any contest, but you all remember we had a contest a few years back about Emily West. And so we're trying to put together a contest, and I think we'll end up probably putting it on our website if we get that together. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to have a contest not to write an essay, but to find that one piece of evidence. We think that there's a very good chance that somewhere out there in a newspaper, in the French family files, in the Maverick papers, there's a shipping document, there's a newspaper article saying that the Frenches have obtained an Alamo cannon and how cool that is. I believe that there's a good chance that it's out there, and we'd love to find it so that we could nail down, so that we don't have to use this circumstantial evidence that we have. We want facts. So be looking for that contest. Like I said, we don't want to do an essay. We just want the document. And we're willing to pay for it. We're going to have cash award based on the value of the document, and we'll have a 3-man jury. I don't know if they know they're on the jury, but we already thought about 3-man jury to grade the piece of the document and find out if it's an A+ or an A or an A-. But we'll get back to you on the details on that. I think that's the end. I appreciate it. Thank you.